I've come out here on about 10 separate occasions today to attempt to record some kind of intro to this video, and I discovered a few things along the way. One, I am terrible at recording intros and I am extremely awkward. Two, there's a lot of bees out here. Three, the sun is my worst enemy, because if it went that way, my nose looked big, and if it went that way, my head looked big. I had some trouble today. All of the recipes are super easy. They're super pantry friendly. They're not very time consuming. They're affordable, and they're not very wasteful. The bread recipe has no yeast, which is something that a lot of people don't have in their pantries. And the pasta recipe is just using regular AP flour as opposed to semolina or Italian double O. So I made my bread first, and I started by mixing all of the flour, the baking powder, and the salt in one bowl, and then I whisked it through so that I made sure there were no large clumps in the batter. Dough is extremely temperamental, so once it is time for you to start adding the water to your dry ingredients, make sure you're only adding a few tablespoons at a time. That way you won't add too much water and ruin the ratio. Eventually, the batter will start coming together, and that's when you can pull it out and start kneading it by hand. If you have a stand mixer, now would probably be the time to use it. I, however, do not, so I kneaded this dough for about 10 minutes. It's not the hardest part, it is the most time-consuming part. You just want to knead it until you get a bounce back, which is basically you press your finger into the dough, and once you see it springing back, you know your dough is done. I used a glass loaf pan for this, and here I'm just kind of smoothing it out and molding it into a shape that will fit the glass pan easier. I'm using my finger here for reference because I need to make sure that my dough isn't bigger than 1.5 inches, otherwise it's not going to rise in the oven. And then when I'm done molding it, I threw it in my parchment lined baking loaf and put it in my oven that was preheated to 375. Making pasta dough is extremely similar to making bread dough. Making pasta dough and making bread dough are very similar. I put all of my flour onto a clean surface, and then I made a well in it, and in the well I added 1 egg at a time, and I whisked it in really well before I added the next egg. Once you added all of your eggs in and you whisked enough flour in, it'll start to get pasty, and that's when you're going to be able to go in and knead it with your hands. I had my water and my oil on the side, and I slowly added the water and the oil as I needed to. Some people need more and some people need less. It really just depends on the environment of the kitchen that you're making the dough in. Rest your dough for about 30 minutes and then start rolling it out until it's as thin as you like it to be. I don't own a fancy pasta making machine, so once my dough was thin enough, I got a pizza cutter and I just started cutting it into thin strips with the pizza cutter. After every 5 or 6 noodles, I would dust them with a little bit of flour so that they wouldn't get stuck together, and I just put them off to a plate on the side. Fresh pasta only takes about 5 minutes in boiling water, so while that was happening, I pulled out my bread, and you can see I scored it on the top. That just means you put an X on your loaf before you put it into the oven, and that allows the bread to rise. In a separate pot, I actually had some oil and butter with garlic chips in it and some salt and pepper and some herbs for the pasta, as opposed to having regular pasta sauce. I also put a little bit of garlic and olive oil on the bread I just made and threw it in the oven to toast. And then when you're done, you should kind of have something that looks like this.